I thought I had the perfect life. A cozy little house in the Phoenix suburbs, a husband who brought me coffee every morning, and a best friend who had been by my side for 15 years. Jake and I had built something beautiful together over 7 years of marriage. Sarah had been my maid of honor, my confidant, my sister, in every way that mattered. But sometimes the people closest to you are the ones who can hurt you the most. Before I dive into what happened that day, I would love to know where you are watching from. Please hit that like button and subscribe if you enjoy real-life stories. Trust me, you will want to stick around for what I discovered when I walked through my own front door that afternoon. My name is Marlene, and at 32, I thought I had figured out the whole adulting thing. Jake and I met during my senior year at Arizona State University. I was rushing through the campus bookstore, arms full of textbooks for my education courses, when I literally crashed into this tall guy with the most genuine smile I had ever seen. His mechanical engineering textbooks scattered everywhere, and as we both scrambled to pick them up, he made some terrible joke about our collision being perfectly calculated. I laughed despite myself, and 3 hours later, we were still talking over coffee at the student union. Our wedding was everything I had dreamed of since I was a little girl. We held it in my parents' backyard in Scottsdale, with string lights twinkling overhead and desert wildflowers everywhere. Sarah stood beside me as my maid of honor, tears streaming down her face as Jake and I exchanged vows we had written ourselves. He promised to be my adventure partner, my safe harbor, and my best friend. I promised to support his dreams, share his burdens, and love him through whatever life threw our way. Those early years were exactly what you would expect from newlyweds trying to make it in the real world. We lived in a tiny apartment where the air conditioning barely worked, and the neighbors upstairs seemed to practice tap dancing at 2 in the morning. But we were happy. We would spread out on our thrift store couch every Friday night with pizza and terrible movies planning our future. We saved every penny we could, putting away money for our dream house while I taught 4th grade at a local elementary school, and Jake worked his way up at a mechanical engineering firm downtown. When we finally bought our house in a quiet subdivision 20 minutes from both our jobs, it felt like we had won the lottery. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a backyard perfect for barbecues, and enough space to finally start thinking about the family we both wanted. We spent our first year painting every room, planting a garden that mostly died because neither of us knew what we were doing, and hosting anyone who would come over for dinner parties where I always made too much food. Our weekends fell into a comfortable rhythm that I absolutely loved. Pizza Fridays became sacred no matter what else was happening in our lives. Saturdays meant hiking trails around Camelback Mountain, where Jake would always pack way too many snacks, and I would complain about the heat while secretly loving every minute of it. Sundays were for sleeping and making pancakes and grocery shopping together, while arguing about whether we really needed the expensive olive oil I always put in our cart. Sarah had been part of my life since our freshman year of college, when we were randomly assigned as roommates in the dorms. She was everything I was not: outgoing, where I was shy, spontaneous, where I was a planner, and fearless, where I second-guessed everything. Somehow our differences made us the perfect complement to each other. She pushed me out of my comfort zone, and I kept her grounded when her big dreams threatened to carry her away completely. When Sarah and David moved to Phoenix 3 years ago, I was beyond excited to have my best friend living just 15 minutes away. David was perfect for Sarah in all the ways that mattered. Where she was all energy and big gestures, he was calm and thoughtful. He balanced her out without trying to change her, and you could see how much they adored each other just by watching them together. The 4 of us fell into an easy friendship that felt effortless and natural. We had standing barbecue dates every other weekend, rotating between our backyards and trying new recipes that usually turned out better than any of us expected. Game nights at our dining room table became legendary among our friend group, with David's competitive streak coming out over Monopoly and Sarah trash-talking everyone during card games. We took vacation trips together to Sedona and Flagstaff, sharing rental houses and creating photo albums full of inside jokes and shared memories. But over the past few months, something had started to feel different. Sarah, who used to call me multiple times a week just to chat about everything and nothing, began keeping our conversations surface level. When we did hang out, she seemed distracted, checking her phone more than usual, and avoiding the kind of deep conversations that had always been the foundation of our friendship. She started canceling plans at the last minute, claiming work was crazy, or that she was not feeling well. When I would ask David about it during our group hangouts, he would just shrug and say, Sarah had been stressed lately, but his expression suggested he was as confused as I was about her behavior changes. At the same time, Jake had started working late more and more frequently. He would text me around 5:30 to say he was staying until 8 or 9 to finish up a big project. When he came home, he seemed tired, but also wired like his mind was somewhere else entirely. Our easy conversations over dinner became more stilted, and our weekend routines started feeling forced rather than natural. I tried to push away the nagging feeling that something was wrong. Marriage goes through phases, I told myself. People get busy with work and stressed about life. Sarah was probably dealing with something personal she was not ready to share yet, and Jake was just focused on advancing his career. I was probably overthinking everything like I always did. But then I started noticing smaller things that felt harder to explain away. Jake had started wearing a new cologne that I had never seen him buy. He was suddenly interested in going to the gym regularly after years of claiming he got enough exercise from our weekend hikes. He started taking phone calls in the bathroom with the door closed, something he had never done before in all our years together. When I found the receipt from an upscale restaurant downtown that I had never heard of, my stomach dropped. Jake explained it away as a business lunch with a potential client. But something about the way he could not quite meet my eyes while telling me made my skin crawl. The receipt was for 2 meals and a bottle of wine in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon. What kind of business lunch included wine at 2 in the afternoon? That Tuesday morning, I woke up feeling queasy and off balance, in a way that had nothing to do with anything I had eaten. I tried to push through my morning routine, making coffee for Jake and myself, packing lunch, and getting ready for another day with my fourth graders. But by 10 in the morning, I knew I needed to go home. I felt like I was coming down with something, and the last thing I wanted was to spread whatever I had to 25 9-year-olds. I called for a substitute teacher, gathered my things, and drove home through the quiet suburban streets. Most people were at work, and the neighborhood had that peaceful, almost sleepy feeling it got during weekday afternoons. As I turned onto our street, I noticed Sarah's silver Honda parked about 3 houses down from ours. I assumed she was visiting Mrs. Thompson, the elderly widow, who lived alone and always appreciated company during the day. I pulled into our garage and entered through the kitchen door, planning to make myself some tea and maybe take a nap before Jake got home. But as soon as I stepped inside, I heard voices coming from the living room. At first I thought Jake had come home sick too. It would not have been the first time we both caught the same bug and ended up spending the day on the couch together watching terrible daytime television and eating soup. But as I got closer to the living room, I recognized the second voice. It was Sarah, and she was laughing in a way that seemed too intimate for a casual visit with a friend's husband. I froze in the hallway between the kitchen and living room, my heart suddenly pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it. Sarah was saying something about how good it felt to finally be honest about their feelings, and Jake was responding with words I had never heard him use about me anymore. They were talking about how much they looked forward to their time together, how difficult it was to pretend everything was normal during our group hangouts. The world seemed to tilt sideways as I realized what I was hearing. This was not some innocent conversation between friends. This was not Sarah coming over to check on Jake because she was worried about him. This was my husband and my best friend discussing their affair like they were planning a weekend getaway. I backed away from the living room as quietly as I could, my hands shaking as I retreated to the kitchen. My mind was racing, trying to process what I had just overheard while simultaneously trying to figure out what to do next. Part of me wanted to storm into the living room and confront them immediately, to scream and cry and demand explanations that I probably did not want to hear. But another part of me, the part that had always been a planner, knew I needed to think this through. David deserved to know what was happening. He was a good man who had always treated Sarah with nothing but love and respect. He worked hard to support their life together and had never given any of us reason to doubt his commitment to their marriage. If Sarah was going to betray their vows, he should not be the last person to find out about it. But I also knew that without proof, this would turn into a situation where it was my word against theirs. Jake and Sarah could easily claim I had misunderstood what I heard, or that I was imagining things because I was sick and not thinking clearly. I needed evidence that would make it impossible for them to lie their way out of what they were doing. I carefully pulled my phone from my purse and opened the voice recording app. My hands were still shaking, but I managed to position myself just outside the living room where I could capture their conversation without being seen. What I recorded over the next 15 minutes was worse than anything I could have imagined. Jake was talking about how their relationship had been going on for 4 months. 4 months of lies, 4 months of them laughing behind David's back and mine. He complained that our marriage had become routine and boring, that I was too focused on my job and not paying enough attention to him. Sarah admitted that she felt terrible about betraying our friendship, but said she could not help how she felt about Jake. She was worried that David was starting to become suspicious because she had been so distant lately. The most devastating part came when Jake told Sarah that he thought he was falling in love with her. He talked about a business trip he was planning to take the following month, except it was not really for business. He and Sarah were going to spend a long weekend together at a resort in Sedona, the same place where all 4 of us had vacationed together just 6 months earlier. I listened to them make plans for more secret meetings, heard them laugh about how clueless David and I were, and watched them move from talking to touching in ways that made me feel sick to my stomach. When they finally headed upstairs to our bedroom, I slipped back through the kitchen and out to the garage, where I sat in my car trying to process everything I had just witnessed. The betrayal felt like a physical weight on my chest. This was not just about Jake cheating on me, though. That was devastating enough. This was about Sarah, the person I had trusted more than anyone else in the world, systematically destroying our friendship while pretending to care about me. This was about both of them making me feel crazy for noticing that something was wrong, gaslighting me into doubting my own instincts while they carried on their affair in my own home. But alongside the pain and shock, I felt something else growing inside me: determination. I was not going to let them continue to make David and me look like fools. I was not going to sit back and let them control the narrative when the truth finally came out. If they wanted to betray their marriages and destroy our friendship, they were going to have to face the consequences of their choices. I started my car and drove aimlessly through the Phoenix suburbs while I formulated a plan. I stopped at a coffee shop, where I sat in my car and listened to the recording again, making sure it was clear enough to understand and that it captured everything I needed. Then I looked up David's work schedule in my phone. I knew he typically got off work at 5:30, and I needed to talk to him before he went home to Sarah. David deserved to hear this from me, not discover it by accident or through some confrontation where Sarah might be able to manipulate the situation. He was going to be hurt and angry, and he needed time to process what was happening before he had to face Sarah. I sent him a text asking if he could meet me at the park near his office after work, telling him I had something urgent to discuss about Sarah. When David arrived at the park, he looked genuinely concerned. He probably thought something terrible had happened to Sarah, some kind of emergency that required my immediate intervention. I hated that I was about to shatter his world, but he needed to know the truth. I struggled to find the right words to begin the conversation. How do you tell someone that their spouse is cheating on them? How do you explain that you have recorded evidence of their betrayal? Finally, I decided to just show him the recording and let him hear for himself what Sarah and Jake had been doing. Watching David's face change as he listened was one of the most heartbreaking things I had ever witnessed. First there was confusion, then disbelief, then a kind of horrible recognition, as he realized that what he was hearing explained so many things that had not made sense to him recently. When the recording ended, he was quiet for several long minutes. His first reaction was denial. He accused me of setting this up somehow, of manipulating the situation to make Sarah look bad, because I was jealous of their marriage or unhappy in my own. But as I explained exactly how I had discovered them and showed him the timestamp on the recording, his anger shifted from me to the reality of what his wife had been doing. David told me that he had suspected something was wrong for weeks. Sarah had become distant and secretive, making excuses to avoid intimacy and spending more time away from home than ever before. She had been protective of her phone in a way that was completely out of character, and she had started picking fights with him about small things that never used to bother her. He had tried to talk to her about it, but she always claimed she was just stressed about work or tired from her busy schedule. We sat in that park for almost an hour planning how we were going to handle the confrontation. David wanted to pack his things and leave immediately to disappear from Sarah's life, the same way she had disappeared from their marriage. But I convinced him that we should face them together, that they should have to look both of us in the eye and explain themselves. I suggested that he come to our house that evening, after I had time to get both Jake and Sarah there. We would play the recording for both of them and see what they had to say for themselves when they could not deny what they had been doing. David agreed, though. I could see how much the whole situation was costing him emotionally. When I got home, Jake was already there, looking guilty and overly attentive in a way that might have seemed sweet if I had not known what he had been doing all afternoon. He asked how I was feeling, whether I needed anything from the store, and if I wanted him to pick up dinner from our favorite restaurant. His attempts at being the perfect husband felt like salt in an open wound. I texted Sarah about a fabricated family emergency, telling her that I really needed her support and asking if she could come over right away. Jake looked surprised when I told him Sarah was coming over, and he tried to suggest that maybe I should just rest instead of having company. But I insisted that I needed my best friend during this difficult time, playing up my supposed illness to make it seem reasonable that I would want Sarah's comfort. Sarah arrived at 7, looking nervous and jumpy, in a way that probably would have seemed normal if I had not known the real reason for her anxiety. She kept checking her phone and seemed unable to sit still, asking multiple times if I was sure I needed her there and whether she should leave me alone to rest. When David showed up 10 minutes later, the tension in the room became almost unbearable. Jake looked confused about why David was there, and Sarah's face went pale when she saw her husband walking through our front door. I could tell that both of them were trying to figure out what was happening while maintaining their facade of innocence. I waited until everyone was seated in our living room, the same room where I had discovered their betrayal just hours earlier. Then I pulled out my phone and told them all that I had something important they needed to hear. The moment I pressed play on that recording, everything changed. Jake's face drained of all color, and he started to speak, probably to try to explain or deny what we were all hearing. But I held up my hand to stop him, and we all listened in complete silence as his own voice filled the room, talking about being in love with Sarah and planning secret getaways behind our backs. Sarah started crying immediately, but they were not the tears of someone who was sorry for what she had done. They were the tears of someone who had been caught and was trying to figure out how to minimize the damage. She looked back and forth between David and me, probably calculating whether there was any way to talk herself out of what we had all just heard. When the recording ended, the silence was deafening. David was the first to speak his voice, calm but devastated, as he told Sarah that he would be staying in a hotel that night and that she should pack whatever she needed, because he wanted her out of their house by the weekend. He was not yelling or screaming, which somehow made his words even more powerful. Jake tried a different approach. He was angry, accusing me of violating his privacy, and claiming that I had no right to record private conversations in our own home. He said I was being vindictive and cruel, that I should have talked to him directly, instead of spying on him like some kind of stalker. His attempts to make me the villain in this situation only made me more determined to stand my ground. Sarah begged David for forgiveness, claiming that her relationship with Jake was just a mistake and that she still loved her husband. But in the same breath, she was looking at Jake with an expression that made it clear her feelings for him were real. She was trying to have it both ways to keep her marriage intact, while also maintaining her relationship with my husband. David was having none of it. He told Sarah that 15 years of friendship with me meant something to him, even if it meant nothing to her. He said that watching me discover my husband's betrayal in such a painful way had shown him exactly who his wife really was, underneath the person he thought he had married. Jake finally seemed to realize that our marriage was over. He went upstairs to pack a bag, probably planning to leave with Sarah and continue their relationship now that everything was out in the open. I followed him to our bedroom and watched him throw clothes into a suitcase, still unable to fully believe that this was really happening. He tried one last time to blame me for the end of our marriage, saying that I had been neglecting him and taking our relationship for granted. But I was done listening to his excuses and justifications. I told him that if he was unhappy in our marriage, he should have talked to me about it instead of sneaking around behind my back with my best friend. If he wanted out, he could have asked for a divorce like an adult instead of lying and cheating and making me feel crazy for noticing that something was wrong. When Jake and Sarah left together that night, I felt strangely relieved. The uncertainty and confusion that had been eating at me for months was finally over. I knew the truth, and I did not have to pretend anymore that everything was fine when it clearly was not. The next few months were a blur of legal paperwork, dividing assets, and learning how to live alone in the house that Jake and I had chosen together. Some days were harder than others, especially when I would find myself automatically making coffee for 2 people, or when I would see something funny and reach for my phone to text Sarah before remembering that she was no longer part of my life. But I also discovered things about myself that I had forgotten during 7 years of marriage. I remembered how much I loved painting, something I had given up when life got busy with work and marriage responsibilities. I started taking art classes on Saturday mornings, the same time when Jake and I used to go hiking together. I reconnected with old friends from college who had drifted away over the years, and I made new friends through my painting class and volunteer work at the local animal shelter. David and I maintained a friendship through the divorce proceedings, supporting each other through the legal complications and emotional challenges of ending our marriages. It was strange to think that the worst betrayal of my life had also brought me a genuine friendship with someone I might never have gotten to know well otherwise. About 6 months after that terrible day when I discovered Jake and Sarah together, I heard through mutual friends that their relationship had not survived the transition from secret affair to actual relationship. Apparently, the excitement and drama that had sustained them while they were sneaking around behind our backs was not enough to build a real partnership on. Jake moved back in with his parents temporarily, and Sarah left Phoenix entirely, taking a job in another state where she could start over without the constant reminders of what she had lost. David met a wonderful woman named Lisa about a year later. She was kind and genuine in all the ways that Sarah had pretended to be, and watching them together made me happy for him in a way I had not expected to feel again. Their relationship was built on honesty and mutual respect, qualities that both David and I had learned not to take for granted after our first marriages ended. I started dating again eventually, though I was much more careful about trusting people with my heart than I had been when I was younger. I met Marcus through the hiking group I joined after my divorce was finalized. He was a veterinarian with a quiet sense of humor and a genuine kindness that reminded me what healthy love was supposed to feel like. We took things slowly, building a friendship first, before we ever thought about anything more serious. The house that had once felt like a monument to my failed marriage gradually became a home that was entirely mine. I painted the walls, colors that I loved, filled the rooms with furniture that reflected my personality, and created spaces for the art projects and hobbies that made me feel most like myself. I planted a new garden in the backyard, and this time I did the research to make sure everything would actually grow. Looking back now, I realize that discovering Jake and Sarah's betrayal was one of the most painful experiences of my life, but it was also one of the most important. It forced me to confront the ways I had been settling for less than I deserved, both in my marriage and in my friendships. It taught me to trust my instincts when something feels wrong, instead of talking myself out of what I know to be true. I learned that betrayal says much more about the people doing the betraying than it does about the people being betrayed. Jake and Sarah made choices that revealed their character in ways that had nothing to do with any shortcomings in David or me. Their inability to be honest about their feelings and their willingness to lie to people who loved them showed exactly who they were underneath the people we thought we knew. But perhaps most importantly, I learned that surviving something that feels like it might destroy you can actually make you stronger and more authentic than you ever imagined possible. The life I built after my divorce was more honest and fulfilling than the life I had been living before, even though it was also more uncertain and sometimes more lonely. I discovered that being alone is not the same thing as being lonely, and that being in a relationship is not automatically better than being single if that relationship is built on lies and compromise. I learned to value my own company and to build a life that made me happy, independent of anyone else's participation or approval. The friendship David and I developed taught me that some of the most important relationships in your life can come from the most unexpected circumstances. We supported each other through one of the most difficult periods either of us had ever experienced, and that shared experience created a bond that was deeper and more honest than many friendships that develop under happier circumstances. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had not come home early that day, if I had never discovered what Jake and Sarah were doing behind our backs. Would their affair have continued indefinitely? Would they have eventually left us for each other? Or would they have ended things and tried to go back to their marriages as if nothing had happened? I am grateful that I will never have to know the answers to those questions. Finding out the truth, as painful as it was, gave me the opportunity to make informed decisions about my life instead of living in a relationship built on lies. It allowed me to start over with a clear understanding of what I wanted from my life and what I was and was not willing to accept from the people I chose to love. The recording that captured my world falling apart also gave me the evidence I needed to rebuild my life on my own terms. It provided the closure I needed to walk away from my marriage and my friendship with Sarah without constantly wondering if I had made the right choice or if I was giving up on something worth fighting for. Today, my life looks completely different than it did that Tuesday morning when I woke up thinking I knew exactly who I was and what my future held. But it is a life I chose consciously, built on relationships with people who have proven their character and their commitment to honesty. It is a smaller life in some ways with fewer people in my inner circle, but it is also a more genuine life where I know that the people who claim to love me are showing me their authentic selves. The house in Phoenix is still mine, though it has been transformed into something completely different than the home Jake and I created together. The hiking trails around Camelback Mountain are still part of my weekend routine, though now I explore them with Marcus or with friends from my painting class, instead of with a husband who was thinking about someone else the entire time. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you leads to the best thing that could happen to you. I never would have chosen to go through the pain of discovering Jake and Sarah's betrayal, but I cannot imagine my life now without the lessons that experience taught me about resilience, authenticity, and the kind of love that is worth holding on to. What would you have done if you found yourself in my situation? Have you ever had to make the difficult choice between confronting a painful truth or living with comfortable lies? Let me know in the comments below, because I read every single one, and I love hearing your thoughts. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more real-life stories that explore the complicated realities of relationships and personal growth. Share this with someone who might need to hear that they are stronger than whatever they are facing right now. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember that sometimes the most difficult endings are actually the most important beginnings. I hope you find the courage to choose truth and authenticity in your own life, even when it is scary and uncertain. Until next time, take care of yourselves and trust your instincts.